Welcome to Thinking Like a Lawyer with your hosts Ellie Mistal and Joe Patrice, talking about legal news and pop culture, all while thinking like a lawyer. Here on Legal Talk Network.
Hello, welcome to another edition of Thinking Like a Lawyer. I'm Joe Patrice from Above the Law. I'm joined by Kathryn Rubino, who is also in lockdown, as all of us here in New York are. But how are you?
I'm doing all right. How about yourself?
You know, it is what it is.
Surviving.
Yeah.
I mean, you are a noted extrovert. I have more introverted tendencies than you do, but I imagine it's particularly hard for those in the world that kind of feed off of the energy of a group or a crowd. I feel like that has to be harder for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's not great, but I've been doing lots of video conferencing, and Zoom is becoming my outlet to the world right now. Zoom and Google Hangouts. I'm kind of agnostic between my video conferencing services right now, but I've been doing lots of multi-hour-long calls with people.
This call is not sponsored by Zoom.
Right. Yeah, I didn't dump all my stock and buy Citrix like some senators. No, but actually, I should clarify. Their argument, whether it's true or not, is that they did not order that purchase, that it was handled by some third party. So we'll see.
Did not order the code red.
Yeah, that's the argument. So they had some really, really smart advisors.
Yeah. Fair. So other than that, how are you doing?
Pretty good. Trying to just kind of catch up on some projects around here that I haven't been doing in a while. And yeah.
So here's a question I think that you are definitely going to have an answer to. But I know that kind of with all of the uncertainty and fear surrounding COVID-19, a lot of folks, and the distinct lack of federal guidance when it comes to a lot of these issues, a lot of folks, not even just New Yorkers, have really kind of turned to Governor Andrew Cuomo as kind of the default leader in these times. I was actually looking at a friend of mine's Instagram account, and she lives in Texas. And she's like, yeah, daily watching Andrew Cuomo. And I was just like, oh dear. What do you think about all that?
Yeah, so you do know that I have an opinion on this.
I do. I figured.
I am not a fan of this embracing of hero worship of this guy for a lot of reasons, many of which I've said before, many of which I don't care to get into. But yeah, no, it's disturbing on a lot of levels, the way in which everyone has kind of flocked to this particular governor. And I actually am putting the finishing touches on a piece that will go up in the very near future here. Actually, by the time you hear this, it will have gone up, talking about some of those concerns. In particular, the concern that I have that I think a social media post like the one you just described actually highlights for me, which is I have a real worry about there is a fine line and balance between people who are appreciating somebody for some cool-headed policy analysis and people who have decided to engage in some sort of authoritarian hero worship. And I worry that we've crossed that threshold right now. And that's troubling to me, not because I can point to a specific thing that he's done that I don't necessarily like, although, I mean, I could, but it's because I feel as though that just opens the door to some really troubling things. And there was an article in The Atlantic that some professors, both law professors and law-adjacent professors who are very data-centric, they put a poll out in the field and asked about, and basically positing some policies that people like a Cuomo could put forward, but they weren't real policies, but they were things that they said, well, public health officials say, we should do this. What do you think? And Americans glommed on top of all of them, no matter how disturbingly unconstitutional and authoritarian some of those ideas were. And I worry that it's hard to find that balance, but we're walking into the area where you don't know if people are liking Andrew Cuomo because he makes them feel comfortable because he's doing something, and they would be fine with him doing anything, or whether they think they agree with these specific ideas.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that you're right. It is kind of hard to know exactly what it is about Cuomo that has kind of struck a nerve with folks. But I think that a big part of it is also just it's something, there's not a lot of information. I mean, part of it's, the science is evolving, what we thought about the disease and about, treatment 3 weeks ago is woefully out of date now. And people need leadership during times like this. And frankly, it's the only leadership that America's really got at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, right. Well, the question is, depending on how you define leadership, I suppose. Doing big, bold actions is a very performative form of leadership. You can feel that something's happened when somebody does something big. There's more quiet, reserved forms of leadership that can also be happening. That's not really going on here. And my concern that I raise in my piece, which is really a concern that is borne out by the data of this group of professors in their Atlantic piece, is I'm not entirely sure whether or not Americans really crave leadership as much as they crave the big, bold thing right now, which is something that sometimes big, bold action is required. The concern that they raise, which I'm not entirely unsympathetic to, is officials who know better tell us we should do this, was very much how we ended up interning Japanese Americans in World War II, right? There are thresholds that can be crossed when you start going down the road of personality cult, hero worship. We just need big action. And I think that America right now, for understandable reasons, doesn't feel like they're mentally ready to have the conversation in their own heads about, do I like this because it's sound, or do I like this because I have a psychological need to be sated by some action? But that is a conversation that it probably behooves all of us to have.
Yeah. Well, that is a very real and serious take about all the terrible stuff that's going on in the world.
Yeah, the fun and frivolous one did not make it into that conversation. I'm sorry.
It's fair and it's real, and it's something everyone's kind of dealing with at the moment.
But what is fun and frivolous going on around it? I mean, I guess we've already talked about hours-long happy hour Zoom conferences.
Yeah, everyone's, I think, doing part of those. My mom even downloaded Zoom onto her phone, because she had heard about some senior citizens comedy hour that was Zoom based, and she asked me for advice to upload it onto her phone so she could listen, give it a whirl.
Yeah, I mean, there I have seen comedy hours. I've seen there's a firm that alerted us today that they're having live music situation where people will play music and they'll broadcast it as a firm happy hour. Oh. Yeah, there's a lot of people trying to come up with ways in which we can all interact. I know that on the law school memes group that I talk about quite a bit, there are members who have started playing video games on Twitch so that everyone can interact. So, it's a thing.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned the law school memes group, and I know that there's a lot of controversy currently going on in law schools about how law schools are going to go forward in, a post-pandemic world. Obviously, law schools have, by and large, moved over to online learning, which makes a ton of sense. The technology does exist, but the big question, especially for law students and ones that are looking to get jobs when they're done with law school, is how are those online classes going to be graded? Right. Bunches of law schools have moved over to PassFail. Cornell, Berkeley, Columbia, NYU says they're going to move over. There's a ton of pass-fail options out there, and some of the deans are saying it may not be a perfect solution, but it is certainly the best solution that we currently have. It's the most humane, it's the most humanitarian of our options. Yeah. But there is that downside. It wasn't something I initially thought at first. I was like, yeah, obviously move over. That makes a ton of sense. But there's the downside, and that is the recruitment calendar is rapidly heading towards us. If there's not a change to the scheduling of on-campus recruitment, folks will have a semester's worth of pass-fail grades and only one semester of real grades that big law will be making their interview decisions upon. And the managing partner the partner in charge of recruitment at Skadden said that one of the issues with that too is that folks that come from less privileged backgrounds are folks that they tend to see that have maybe a more shaky first semester, but really get it together for the second semester, that make a big dent into who they're recruiting and people that they're looking at. And I think that has a pretty big implication for the industry, not just the actual students who potentially have their opportunities limited because of PassFail on their resume.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that the improvement over time is something that gets lost, and so that is a real concern. But I don't know. I'm one of these people who wonders really how, do we really have to feel bad for these big firms not being able to figure out from a meeting who to talk? This is all a filtering mechanism, right? They will talk to people.
Yeah, they'll talk to some people, but I know OCI was a long time ago for you, but if you remember,
wow.
I mean, I had to, but they have everyone puts their resume in to interview with Skadden, but they only have 48 slots, or even for the first general go through, and they depend on their grades to kind of to determine who gets those interviews. And I don't feel bad for the firms. I feel bad for the students, who, I mean, law schools can be a big adjustment for a lot of people, and maybe they didn't have the semester that they really wanted for a semester, but they were getting, their shit together for the second semester, and everything looked good before the freaking pandemic came. I feel bad for the students who feel like their opportunities will be limited as a result.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that's who to be concerned about. My issue is the firms don't have to live in a world in which they only talk to 10 kids, right? There is obviously, if you're having an on-campus conversation, there are limitations to how many hours there are in a day. But this is why White and Case actually has a product that they rolled out before all of this reached this point. Actually, they were doing it for other reasons, which allows folks who do not have, say, an on-campus slot to record answers to questions, a common set of questions. It's a portal where they can come in and answer the questions as posed, and it allows them to see people who may not have gotten the interview that they needed, and see them and evaluate them and maybe ask them for a call back afterwards. It's a way in which they can expand the pool, in particular because it's, even though a lot of the big schools that we're talking about have interviews with everybody, but there are regional programs that are good that could produce students who could move on where, the firm doesn't necessarily send somebody to interview, and this expands that too. But my point in how this relates to this is that there are ways in which these firms could change their process to ensure that they talk to more people, and that's really all that is required. Looking and saying, yeah, we don't really know who from among all of the excellent people who went to Chicago this year, we don't know which of them is slightly more excellent than the others. How about instead of just making arbitrary distinctions based on second semester grades, let's talk to more people and try and parse it out that way. I mean, they all did go to Chicago, right? They're all going to be fine.
That's a good point. And there are definitely people working to think about how the system works, right? Columbia announced that they were moving their on-campus recruitment program to January, to kind of give students an extra semester's worth of grades to put out there. And, so far we haven't heard any of the Columbia students complaining about that. But even before the pandemic happened, Columbia, as well as NYU and Harvard, had instituted an even early interview program whereby they would let their students interview even before their big kind of on-campus program with a select number of big law firms. So the trend really has been to make it earlier in the summer before, May or June, well before the traditional time of recruitment starts. But after the pandemic, Columbia canceled that program and pushed all of their recruiting to January, which I mean, obviously there are some concerns that if they're the only ones who do it, that their students might be at a competitive disadvantage. If firms feel like their classes are already full, or if the economy dips even further and they don't really have the bandwidth to make as many offers as they thought they would be able to, if they're the only ones kind of standing alone in a January date, the students are potentially at a disadvantage.
No, I mean, I think that's right. I feel like everybody's going to move that way ultimately, though.
Yeah, I would think so. I think that, in the letter that Columbia sent out, they were like, oh yeah, this has been done in consultations with many employers. And I think that's certainly what Skadden seems to want. I think that's probably what that seems to be what the industry wants. So hopefully that will work out. But, kind of being the lone, the first one out is always a little nerve-wracking. And I think on the other side of the issue, you have a school like Chicago who announced this week that despite petitions and some students, lots of students who were advocating to move to a pass-fail system, that they were going to make sure that there was no change to their grading. The same mandatory curve and grading system that they've always had will be in effect they're about to start their spring quarter. They don't have semesters, they're on a quarter system. And we've gotten a ton of people complaining about that. Particularly, I think 2 and 3Ls, who maybe feel a little more secure kind of in what their future will look like than 1Ls who are very nervous about everything. They want at least the option of pass-fail, and the dean at Chicago said that they would keep their options open, but as of right now, that's what that they were going to keep it all as per usual. I mean, we don't think that any of you have the disease, so good luck.
Yeah, there's not really a good reason why 2L and 3L classes shouldn't be pass-fail. Like the only real parsing that happens is in those 1L courses where they make actual hiring decisions, snap hiring decisions based on those. If people want to have grades, if perhaps they had a bad first couple of years and they're really hoping acing video games and the law, which is actually an interesting, I always use that as my example of like a seminar that doesn't make any sense. But then again, last week's episode, we talked pretty in depth about the importance of video games and the law these days. It was
a really interesting episode.
Yeah. Well, in fairness, that was law about video games. Usually those seminars that are blank and the law are usually more like, in Super Mario Brothers, what does that tell us about monarchy versus Western conceptions of liberalism? So that still is kind of a waste of time. Anyway, yeah. So, but there's no reason why those courses shouldn't be. If you feel like you need to get a grade in them so that you can convince people that getting your good grade in that philosophy course means that it's okay that you failed contracts, then, well, whatever.
I mean, there are some of the schools that have moved over to different systems have instituted optional pass-fail programs where, the truth is there's a big time zone issue. Students, have been told to go back home, and, students in Hawaii in East Coast class time, of 9 a.m. suddenly seems ridiculous, but mandatory attendance policies mean that they have to try to kind of be there. And, there's that issue. There's time zone issues that you have no idea what people's families are going through or loved ones. If you have somebody that you know and love and care about that is suffering from the disease, or if you're immunocompromised and you have a ton of other worries and, on top of just kind of the, oh my gosh, there's a global pandemic going on, the school's not really in a position to deal with those issues.
That makes sense. I don't see a really good reason to maintain the grades at this point. I think the argument that, well, it's a lecture, so who cares, is not really one. I think it does a good job of explaining how ridiculous the Socratic method was, if we're just going to let somebody talk uninterrupted and make that the whole thing. But it is still different. And even if you're getting the information through that, it's different to say, turn on online learning, but everyone's safe and sound in their dorm, versus turning on online learning and a million other things you can't predict are going on in everyone's life. That seems like a perfect opportunity to make things pass fail, and a perfect opportunity for the law firms themselves to rethink how they approach recruiting so that they can ensure that they're getting the right people, even though there's not going to be grades. And what can they do to make sure that they open up their pool, make sure that they are getting the best people? Because sometimes I think these firms arbitrarily cut themselves off from good attorneys because they're too obsessed with making sure that they have grade markers that may or may not reflect how well that person develops into an attorney.
Yeah, I mean, I will tell you though that after I wrote an article about the Chicago situation, and I have received quite a few, more than I would have certainly anticipated, of folks writing to me telling me that, basically that the people at Chicago that are looking for pass-fail credits are basically soft. Like what somebody wrote me said that my clients aren't grading my efforts on a pass-fail basis during this time, and I suspect their customers aren't either. If anything, we see it as an opportunity to shine despite the challenges. Maybe it's time for law students to grow up and show the ability to adapt to difficult circumstances. And I just think that kind of misses the point.
Yeah. Well, and the irony, of course, is that you absolutely are being graded on a pass-fail system with your clients. Clients stick with, because the elasticity of a client decision is not what people think it is. It's not as though midstream you're getting fired from somebody. Indeed, people will stick with their attorneys far past the point where they probably should invest in a new search to find a new firm far longer, because there are issues like loyalty and if it ain't broke, don't fix it mentalities and stuff like that. You are graded pass-fail all the time. You do the job or you don't. And that's pretty much all there is to it when it comes to this. And yeah, you can get into a discussion of securing the best result or whatever, but those sorts of nuanced decisions and granular differences, while very important, is stuff that a lot of clients don't really think about because of loyalty and stuff like that. And that is breaking down. And there are people out there who are doing the legal operations and analytic work to help clients become more cold-hearted and cut off a firm who doesn't deliver perfect at all times. But a lot of these decisions are hard. In any one case, you get a result that is X. How do you know that you would have gotten a different result if you went somewhere else? You don't really. So long as it is acceptable to the client, it is probably keeping you in the job. So yes, it's a pass-fail work.
Yeah, and the other thing is, especially now, right? Like, I don't think that there are a ton of people who are making those cold-hearted decisions, particularly in the middle of a global pandemic. I think everyone is been very, my experience has been very understanding. I may not like the fact that the supermarket doesn't have any Charmin, but I'm not going to be yelling at the stock kid because there isn't any toilet paper, right? Like, everyone understands that this is a stressful time, and we're all doing the best we can. Somebody else said that there'd be like some scarlet letter on folks's transcripts if they had pass-fail this semester, and I was just like, I don't think that's true. I think everyone's going to remember that in 2020 we had a damn pandemic that shut down everything. No one's going to be like, oh, that's weird. I'm like, oh, I know exactly why that happened.
I had a pass-fail in my 1L year because something came up in middle of second term. Our contracts professor had a family emergency and had to leave. A new contracts professor came in. The course wildly shifted focus from where it had been to something else. People were confused as to what the emphasis was. There was a discussion that it would still be her exam, even though we had a new teacher, which people were like, well, that doesn't make any sense. So it became a real mess. And the decision was it'll be pass-fail. And that's pass-fail in contracts. This is the very definition of a core class, right? Mm-hmm. And it was okay. Everybody just said, oh, what's this? I said, oh, our section had this issue. And everyone just moved on with their lives. It was amazing how...
You still got offers. You still had a big law career.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not that bad. I think that sometimes people lose their heads a little bit, kind of wanting to cling to the way things are supposed to be during a time when nothing is the way it's supposed to be right now, right? There's no certainty. There's a lot of upheaval. So some folks feel the need to really kind of cling, with two hands to any kind of semblance of the way things used to be. And that's just not the way they are right now.
Yeah.
Speaking of that, relatedly, there was a big law, a Wachtell partner who wrote an memo to his clients that has kind of gotten some traction, basically getting really pissed off about litigation practice that he considers non-essential. Like he says, this is not a normal time. Everyone needs to cool down if they're talking about cases that are not really essential to fighting the pandemic. And if somebody who's at the top of a incredibly prestigious firm like Wachtell can have that amount of perspective, I think we all can.
Yep. No, I agree. Well, we here at Above the Law are going to continue writing stories about all this and keeping you up to date on the impact on the legal profession.
And also, just a quick thank you to everyone who's reached out to folks at Above the Law seeking information about the ATL founder, David Latt, who most of you know has been diagnosed with the coronavirus and is currently hospitalized on a ventilator. To the extent that there's information to share, we will, do that on the website. But we really appreciate, and I know his family really appreciates all of the well wishes and thoughts and concerns that folks have shared about David.
Very true. And with all that said, keep following us and we'll keep you up to date. You should also be, in addition to reading Above the Law, listening to this, subscribing to it, giving it reviews. Those are all important. You should listen to The Jabot, which is Kathryn's personal podcast about issues in the law, diversity in the law. You should be listening to the rest of the Legal Talk Network family shows. You should follow us on Twitter. I'm at Joseph Patrice. She's at Kathryn1. And that's pretty much everything.
Bye.
Talk to you later.
If you'd like more information about what you've heard today, please visit LegalTalkNetwork.com. You can also find us at AboveTheLaw.com, ATLRedline.com, iTunes, RSS, Twitter, and Facebook. The views expressed by the participants of this program are their own and do not represent the views of, nor are they endorsed by, Legal Talk Network, its officers, directors, employees, agents, representatives, shareholders, and subsidiaries. None of the content should be considered legal advice. As always, consult a lawyer.